Good afternoon. My name is Daria Orlowska. I am the data librarian and assistant professor at Waldo Library. And today's workshop, which is really a demonstration, will be about surveys set up in Qualtrics. So the purpose of this workshop is to help you understand how to access Qualtrics and how to access the IRB survey forms, how to integrate your consent forms into Qualtrics, how to set up your survey questions and the different options of survey questions, how to implement survey flow so that when you have the consent form that participants who do not consent will be moved out of the survey, and also how to make sure that all the relevant settings are applied so that anyone who is, if you say that your survey is anonymized, that it will continue to be anonymous, and so you're not collecting any additional information on the participants. You will also learn how to obtain the survey link for the survey and locate the results, as well as find out what exactly you should be submitting to the IRB through Cayuse in order to receive approval. This workshop is not going to cover how to generate variables or questions for your survey. If you're interested in hearing more about data variables and thinking about how to derive variables from your research question, that I would suggest that you check out my workshop, Preparing for Projects with Data Workflows. It is available on YouTube right now. There's a lot of content in this demonstration. Feel free at any point if you aren't sure on if you don't understand what I just said, or if you'd like me to repeat myself, or if you have any additional questions about things that I'm not covering, feel free to either put that into chat, which I will be monitoring, or if you feel comfortable, unmute yourself and ask me directly. Okay, so without further ado, here we go. And I'm actually going to exit out of this PowerPoint. I will share this with all of you later, and it has all the screenshots of this demonstration that will hopefully help refresh your memory. But we're going to go ahead and start here at GoWMU. So if you've never accessed Qualtrics before, you can find it by searching for Qualtrics within GoWMU and clicking on Qualtrics Login and Overview. This will give you some information about signing on. Right here is the direct link. You will sign on using your Bronco ID and password. If it is your first time logging in, you just have to click I don't have a pre-existing account, and that message will not appear to you for you next time. So you can access Qualtrics through this link. And once you click this link, you will be directed to this, the Qualtrics homepage. I actually prefer to go into projects, and I have my projects bookmarked so that it always takes me to my folders and all my questionnaires. And I would suggest that you do the same. You can bookmark your the homepage, but I rarely use it, and so I find that I prefer to just have it navigate to projects. You will see that I navigated into projects by clicking on the top left-hand corner next to the Qualtrics logo. There are 3 lines, and that will help you navigate through the different Qualtrics submenus. So within projects, you will notice here on the left-hand side, I have a set of folders. And the first thing that I like to do is I like to create a folder with my project name, just so that I know where to find it. So we can go ahead and do that first by creating a new folder down here. And we can just type in, I'm going to type in sample research project, just because I don't have a title for this demonstration, but you can feel free to type in any sort of abbreviation that will help you about your project. And then I'm going to go ahead and put it under project and program, since it's not, the subfolder is it was putting it under another folder. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and navigate to the right-hand side and press Create Project. This will get us started on creating a survey from scratch. And that navigates us to create a project from scratch survey. And we're going to click on that, and then we'll have a right-hand menu that appears. The reason we're doing this instead of using any of the project templates is because I haven't found that there is really a project template that works well for this. And if you are setting up a survey as part of an IRB requirement, that is just something that you will need to integrate into your survey, which isn't already prepared by Qualtrics. So we're going to go ahead and press Get Started, and it will give us a menu. And the first thing we want to do is name our project. So I'm going to put in Sample Research Project again. And I'm going to choose my folder where I want it to live. I would recommend you do this so you don't lose track of where it is. And we're going to create a blank survey project. And we're going to go ahead and create this project. I'm going to move this over. Okay, we've navigated into Qualtrics into the survey menu. So just a quick overview, if you're not familiar with Qualtrics, is that you have your project at the top. It will tell you, where it is, what folder it lives in. You have a top menu, which is survey creation, workflows, distributions, data analysis, results, and reports. Right now, we're just going to be working within the survey. We have a left menu, which talks about different parts of the survey. So you have the builder, which is actually putting in the questions, the survey flow, which is depending on how a participant responds to a question, what you may choose to show as part of your survey. This will come into play with the consent form especially, but can also come into play if you have any inclusion or exclusion criteria. And then you have the look and feel, which is just some additional options as well as survey options. All of these will have additional things that you can customize your survey and put additional options in depending on your need. And then I probably will not be going over quotas or translations today. Then you have the second menu, which is depending on which submenu you're in, you'll have additional options. Then you'll actually have the body of where we're going to be creating our questions. And then we have two buttons here, preview and publish, which talks about our survey. Okay, so any questions for me right now? I see a question if this will be recorded. Yes, it is currently recorded right now. I will share the recording with all of you, and I will share the slides, which have screenshots of all the things I will be talking about today. Any other questions for me right now about just the background? If not, what we're going to do is first, I'm going to transition over to where the consent forms are. So the first thing you'll want to do within your Qualtrics survey is go ahead and put in some consent language, just to make sure that the participant is agreeing to participate in your survey. You might not be using Qualtrics for human subjects studies or IRB approval. It might be an internal survey or for any other reason, in which case you don't have to do this step. But if you are doing it as part of a research study, this is where you find all your forms. So the forms are under the Office of Research and Innovation. They have a section for human subject forms. If I scroll up here, you will see that it is within this menu under human subjects, and it has some Cayuse guidance as well. This will all be linked within those slides that I will share with you. And what we're typically interested in is this anonymous online survey consent form. And this assumes that you do not want any identifying information from your participants and that you're putting things online, which you are. So we can just download it. Clearly, I've downloaded it multiple times, and this is kind of what it looks like, right? You have a Word document, and you have some customizable fields in here. So you can do this a few different ways. You can choose to either customize this consent form within the Word document, or you can choose to customize it within Qualtrics. It might be best for you to customize it outside of Qualtrics since you will be sharing it with the IRB through Cayuse, and so you will need access to this information, but either way, it's pretty easy to copy and paste. So you will notice that there's brackets where you need to put things in. Just a few notes about this consent form. One, we make sure that we keep this format even if we're putting it into Qualtrics. So the structure is there for legibility, so make sure that you keep the spaces where they are. The thing that tends to trip people up is this risks and costs. So just a quick overview, risks are anything that put participants at risk. That can be risk of de-identification. That can be the participant might feel discomfort while answering a question because it is of sensitive nature, makes them think of negative emotions or brings up negative emotions or makes them think of negative experiences. So within a survey, though, those are kind of the things you'll be dealing with, and you do have some examples here, sensitive questions. And then cost, if you're bringing participants in, that might be cost of travel, like the amount of money it takes to take public transportation in. Within surveys, your cost is usually time to complete a survey. So you have some helpful options that you can put in within this consent form. Potential benefits. Usually when you have a survey, there are no direct benefits to the participant. Benefits usually, if you see them within research studies, they are things like you can get a treatment, you can cure your disease, you can get an intervention. Those are benefits. Surveys do not have those benefits. Incentives are not benefits. So usually you will be putting, there are no direct benefits for participation. If there is an incentive, you also can put it in here, such as participating in the study gives you the ability to participate in a raffle, for example. Usually the alternative to participating is not to participate at all. And then we will be also filling in your time that the study will take. So we have this consent form, you filled it in, and now we need to actually put it within Qualtrics, right? So we can do that. I'm going to move this out of the way by navigating back to Qualtrics and starting off with this first block. So the way that Qualtrics is structured is that you have the title of your project. If you click on this, you can actually rename what your project is called. And then you have blocks. Blocks are how it is structured, and it will give us a sense of study flow later on, where we talk about like some participants have to accept the consent form in order to see the rest of the study. So what I like to do to make that process really easy is to actually rename the question blocks. So I'm going to rename this consent form. And the first thing within the consent form block is the first question, which isn't actually a question. So it's just a bunch of text that tells the participant what is the study, who they can contact, and what they can expect from the study. So we're going to navigate over to the second menu, and we're going to change question type from multiple choice to text/graphic. And from here, it says click to write the question text. We can go ahead and write whatever we want at this point, but because I want to keep the formatting of the consent form, I'm going to click Rich Content Editor. And from here, I can take my consent form and I can just copy everything over. I can't copy this sentence over because the way that it is entered is as a screenshot and not as text. That's fine. So I will paste it in here. And as you notice, the formatting is mostly there. Like this line had moved, but we can easily reformat things. And then we're also going to want to add that extra line that didn't make it over. So this study was approved by the Western Michigan University Institutional Review Board, WMU IRB, on approval date. And that approval date is one that you will get once your study has been approved through Cayuse, and you will make updates to this survey. Okay, so, and I clicked out and now everything has updated. So you will see that there are places where you need to update that information, but this is basically the bones of it, right? So your first question, which you can change what your questions are called. The only reason you might want to do that is because once you export the results, this will appear within your spreadsheet. And you will notice that if you move questions around, Qualtrics won't automatically renumber. So that is something that you might want to renumber yourself so that you can avoid confusion in the future. So you can change it to whatever you'd like. I can put consent language here for myself because that's how I like to think of it. Okay, so you have your body of your consent form, and now we're going to add a new question, and we're going to add multiple choice. And there's two different ways to add a new question. You can either click the new question, or if you navigate to the previous question, you can add a new question below or above, which could be helpful if you were doing things out of order. I'm just going to click this, and I'm going to click multiple choice. So now what we need to do is we need to have the participant agree to participating in our study. So we can do consent, participant consent. And we can put in participating in this survey online indicates your consent for use of the answers you supply, which is it's directly from that template that I showed you before. And now you have to add two buttons. The first one is I agree to participate in this research study. And then the second one will be I do not agree to participate in this research study. You may notice that we have a third option. We don't want that. And so if we navigate over to this left menu, we can reduce the number of options, and we have our two options that we would like. Any questions for me at this point? Okay, so now that we're done with this consent language and the first question, we can move on to our next questions. We will go back and make sure that participants can't proceed if they click I do not agree to participate in just a little while after we've set up all our questions. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create a new block. So remember how I said that just to make it easier for us to set up privileges for participants to see certain questions, we want to designate blocks. If we just added a question here, what would happen is that immediately after they agreed or disagreed to participating, they would see the next question, usually on that same page, and we want to prevent them from seeing the survey question until they've agreed to participate. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new block. And here, depending on your survey, you might have different needs. So you can think of, are there any inclusion or exclusion criteria in your study that you would like to take care of first to kick out participants who are not eligible so they don't have to go through the entire survey? You may choose to have your exclusion criteria within your other questions. So for example, you might have a demographics section, and you may ask participants what their profession is. And if you're only interested in students, you you can later go in and only pick students as your cohort, or as the responses that you only look at. But you can also take that question and put it into a new block and then immediately kick out those participants if they don't answer in the way that you are hoping. So I'm going to put that for the sake of demonstration. I'm going to create a new block that says exclusion criteria. And we're going to create a new question that will be an exclusion question that we're interested in. So, are you a student? Because maybe that's the population we would like to look at. You will notice that Qualtrics has helpfully, in this case unhelpfully, populated a bunch of different options for me. And I do not want definitely not or definitely yes as options. I want this to be a binary. So I can go ahead and reduce the number of options, and you can see yes or no. And sorry, my screen is blocking, but you can choose to reverse the order of these questions if you want to. So you can have yes first and no second. So let's say this is our only exclusion criteria for our study. If you have more, you can add additional questions. And now I'm going to add another block, and I'm going to put my demographics. Okay, and so now I will go ahead and add a new question. And let's say that it is multiple choice. And we say, where do you or let's say, do you currently live in Michigan? I have a question. Is there a character limit when you add, are you a student? I don't know what the character limit is. I think that it is pretty long. Um, you will notice at the top, let's click out of this, that there is an expert review score that will tell you some additional information about your survey and how it reads based on their algorithm or their requirements. So it might tell you, oh, if your question is too long, it might be more difficult for participants to navigate through. But I haven't personally encountered a character limit when I've asked questions. That being said, I don't think my questions have been longer than like 3 lines. So I think if you'd like, I can follow up for that, or you can do your own research to find that out. But I don't think you will typically encounter an issue with character limit. What I wanted to demonstrate here is that there are a few different options in terms of how you're presenting questions if you need additional information. So you can say, do you currently live in Michigan? You can do like yes or no, and you can create a new question that is a text entry question, such as, where do you currently live? And we can set some logic so that individuals who are answering no to do you currently live in Michigan will receive this question about prompting them to provide more information about where they currently live. And individuals who say that they currently live in Michigan will not receive this question. The way that we can set up this type of logic within our survey is by clicking on the question that is dependent on the answer of the previous question and right-clicking it. So I just right-clicked within the box that said question 5, and I click Add Display Logic. So the question, where do you currently live, is dependent on the question, do you currently live in Michigan, if the question no is selected. And we save this, and so this question will only appear if this one is if this one has the response no. And we can test that later to make sure that things are actually flowing the way that we expect. Or maybe you want to approach this a different way, where we add a multiple choice question and we say, where do you currently live? And perhaps we're interested in Michigan and maybe Indiana, and then we have an other option. So maybe we want participants to fill in where they live, but we're not sure what our sample is going to say. And so we can navigate to this drop down next to other. But if I click on other, it will give me like this little drop down menu, and I can press allow text entry. And that just means that participants can put in a response. This will be a free response text, and so you'll have to weigh the pros and cons. There will be more cleaning involved with free response, but it might give you more accurate information. You can just do the same thing with like gender questions or any sort of questions where you feel like there might be another option that that might and a question that only allows for a binary might benefit from. Okay, so we have our questions, right? We have our consent. So I'm just going to demonstrate a few other types of questions that you may find that you would like to use within your survey. So the first type of question we talked about was multiple choice. Usually we have two choices, but as you can see, you can have multiple choices, right? You may also find that you are interested in free text response. This is the where do you currently live is a free text response. And if we click into this one, you will see that the text type is single line. You can choose to have multiple lines or essay text box. I don't think you'll probably use password, but that is also an option. I think that just hides the response. You may also find, I'm going to create, you can choose the question type from this menu, or you can, if you just choose the first one, you can always change it within the question type menu on the left-hand side. You may find that you're interested in a Likert scale. That is actually hidden under matrix table, and you will find that matrix type you can put in Likert or ranked order. So perhaps that is something that you are interested in as a question type. The other one you might find yourself using is the ranked order, which, like I said, you can either use from the left-hand, select from the left-hand menu or select from the add a new question option. The ranked order allows you to have it in different formats. So you can see here on the left-hand side, the format is drag and drop, which is probably the one that you're most familiar with, but you can also change it to radio buttons or any other type of options that you would like for participants. Okay, so we have our questions set up. And now what we're going to do is we're going to consider which of these questions are mandatory versus optional. So if we navigate up here, we absolutely want participants to answer this first question about agreeing to participate in the study or not agreeing to participate, because that's like they can't proceed. We can't have them proceed to the other questions without answering these. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this section and we're going to go into response requirements and we're going to add requirement. And in this case, we're forcing the response. Once we turn this on, toggle this option on, you will see that on the right-hand side next to these three dots, there is an asterisk that appears. So Qualtrics will helpfully tell us whether we have enabled a requirement. So we're forcing the participant to respond to this question before they can see the other questions. It will actually not let them go any further if we do this. So for this question, we definitely want to force a response. If we have an exclusion question, we probably also want to force a response. We want to know whether they are a student and they can participate in our questionnaire. However, for questions like this, do you currently live in Michigan, which is not a required question because it is not part of our exclusion criterion, it's not part of our consent process, we can still add a requirement and we can request a response. You don't have to do this. As part of the consent form, the language states that all responses are optional. However, a lot of the times participants will go through the question and they may skip one accidentally. requesting a response just has Qualtrics come up with a little pop-up window, and it will ask, are you sure you want to proceed? There is a question that doesn't have a response filled in. And then participants can go back and say, oh, I missed this question, I meant to fill it out. Or they can say, no, I actually didn't want to respond to this question, and they can proceed to the next one or to the next page. Okay, any questions about mandatory versus optional questions? And we can do this for the rest of them. We can say that we request a response for all of these if you would like to. I typically do, because I find that it makes me feel better about participants maybe missing things. And so once you have mandatory versus optional questions set up, now we're going to go to survey flow. So at the very beginning of this workshop, I talked about how we want to prevent participants from accessing other parts of the survey if they did not consent to participating. So the way that we accomplish this within Qualtrics is through survey flow. So this is over here on the left-hand menu. It's right underneath the builder menu, which is what we're currently in. We click on survey flow. And here we see all of our blocks that we created. And they are helpfully named because we took the time to name them. We have the consent form, the exclusion criteria, and demographics. And now we can add some logical statements, very similar to how we set up the question about, do you live in Michigan? Yes, no. If no, show this other question where participants can fill in some additional information. But this is just display logic. So the first thing we want to do is, for the consent form, we want to add a condition so that if they say yes to participating, now they're shown the exclusion criteria. So I'm going to click on Add Below, and this will give me a menu. I want to have branch logic. This is just saying if they select this response, show them this. So click branch logic, and I'm going to drag my exclusion criteria by clicking on, you have to click on move, and then it will show you that cursor with the 4 arrows, and I'm going to put it underneath that element. And it says this branch will not be triggered until you add a condition. So click on add a condition. So if the question participant consent is supplied, and they say, I agree to participate, then they will be shown the exclusion criteria question. Okay. And then after the exclusion criteria question is shown, we're going to add below, we're going to have another condition because we want these to be students. So we're going to add a question. So if the question, are you a student, is selected as yes, then we want to have them see the demographics. Okay, so we've established what we want to do if they select yes. However, we also need to put in logic for if they select no. So what we're going to do for the consent form, we're going to add a block. We're going to have branch logic, and our condition is going to be if the participant selects, I do not want to agree to participate, and then we want to prompt the end of the survey. Okay, so if they say no, they're kicked out. If they say yes, they see the rest of this. You can customize the end of survey message. There is a default one, and it will have a default one. There is a custom one, and you'll have to click override survey options in order to get the custom message. However, the custom message you will have to create in a different part of Qualtrics. It's actually within the My Library submenu. So we can come back to this after we're done setting up the different conditions. Okay, so we did it for the consent form. However, we also need to do something very similar with the exclusion criteria, right? Because we want to kick participants out if they say they're not a student, because that is not our target population for this example. So we're going to add below. we're going to have a branch, and we're going to add the condition. Again, similar. Are you a student? No. Press OK, and the next element we're adding is end of survey. Okay. Any questions for me about this survey flow? It is a little bit complicated, but once you kind of play around with it and you preview things, it will make it easier for yourself. It will also make it easier for yourself if your blocks have names so that you know what relates to what. You notice how I moved things over. It's very helpful. Then your blocks are named so you know what you're moving over and you're not engaging in guesswork. And it's helpful sometimes when your questions also have additional information. So you will notice that it shows you the question, so that is maybe a little less relevant. I would really suggest that you do this after you've established all your questions, especially all your blocks of questions. So if you've established all your consent form, your exclusion criteria, your demographic block, and any other block that you may have. You can come back to this and add it, but it will add it in the wrong place, and then you'll have to figure out where to slot it in. So I like to not make too many changes after, though it is still possible to do. So once you've done this, you need to go to the bottom and click apply, or it will not save your changes. If you do not click apply and you try to move into something else, it will be like, why do you want to save your changes? So Qualtrics has become better at prompting you, but just go ahead and click apply. If you click on anything, if I click on end of survey, it will go ahead and the apply button will reactivate because it thinks that you have made changes. You can choose whether or not to save them. I just typically do for the most part. Okay. So we have gone through the survey flow, and what we're going to do now is what I promised you with these custom messages. So I think the custom message is your response has been recorded. Thank you. And perhaps you would like some more information than just your response has been recorded. Thank you. So the way that we can provide additional end of survey messages is we can navigate from the top menu into the libraries section. The libraries section is essentially kind of like your projects menu. I have a bunch of folders here that have end messages for different projects. I would recommend setting one up. Sorry, I'm leaning over because my laptop is covering the screen. By clicking new folder, I'm going to put sample research project into here. And then you will go to the right-hand side and click new resource and click message. So these are your custom messages. From here, I would select what type of message it is. For us, it is going to be end of survey. Okay, and we have a few different end of survey messages we could do. I would suggest maybe at least like two. So one, if they've agreed to participate and they finished the survey. So we can call this sample research project end survey, or like finished, whatever makes most sense to you. And for this, I would type something like, thank you for your time. Your response has been recorded. If you have any questions, contact the PI at, and maybe a phone number. You have that information within the consent form. I just like to add it again for the participant at the end of the survey to remind them. The reason for that is that sometimes participants always have the right to contact you and say, I don't want to be part of this research study, please remove my responses. That gives them that option. It also gives them the option to contact you and ask additional questions if they have it. This is also a really good place at this and sample research project finish custom message to put in a link to another survey if you have an incentive, for example, a raffle, and you do want to collect personal information. So as part of the anonymized survey, you're not allowed to collect any identifying information. In fact, we will go through the options in just a little bit, and we will make sure that option is turned off. But so you will want to create a new survey that collects that information. So you can do that here. If you would like to participate in a raffle as part like as a thank you or as an incentive, whatever, please click this link. There is a link button right here. You will have to create that second survey first before you can link it. Otherwise, you can just keep this as a placeholder for now until you create that second survey. Something like your survey responses will not be associated with your raffle entry. Okay, so we can click save on this and we see that it has populated within the folder. We can do this as many times as we need to. Message end of survey, we can say sample research project, no consent, for example. Like, thank you for your interest in the project. Not consent, like we are not able to collect responses if you are not interested in participating. Something like that. We can save that. And then maybe we want another one that has something to do with like project excluded. Like, thank you for your interest. Unfortunately, you do not meet the inclusion criteria, and so your responses, and so we cannot continue your participation in this study, something along those lines. Okay, so you have all your sample libraries, sample messages created. And now what we can do is we can navigate back to our projects. So the way we do that is we use the left menu, those 3 lines, going into project, finding the relevant folder. Usually Qualtrics is nice enough, and the last one that you used is the one that will pop up by clicking in on this by the name. You will find your way back in here, and then going back into survey flow, we can go into the end of survey and press customize. We can override the survey options, select the custom message, which it will be in my library, which will be the sample research, no consent, which is why it's so important to label things accurately, because it becomes easy to find it. And then you have a few different options. You can choose not to record survey response. You can choose to do a bunch of things. I just typically leave it as is and press OK. You can do the same thing with this one, the exclusion criteria, override, custom message, which is the excluded. And I think that you could even, I think there's a way to do the final survey message within the builder, but I think you could probably add it here too. We're going to check real quick. So I applied all those changes. We're going to go back into the survey builder. And if we scroll all the way down, we have the end of survey message. And if we click on it, you'll see end of survey message default. I want it to be custom. I'm going to load the message that I created, which was the finished one. And now you see it previews what I put in, which is great. Okay. Any questions for me about library messages or survey flow or going back and forth about those things? Okay, So the next thing that we want to do once we've established all our questions, did the survey flow, put the messaging in, is I want to just take you through some of the survey options, just to give you a sense of what are the things that I typically pay attention to, and that can help you make your survey more intuitive for your participants, and also some things that you definitely want to do. So let's navigate in this left menu to look and feel. The look and feel is, you will notice that you have some themes. These are provided by Western Michigan because they've been integrated with that. I typically don't worry about that, but if you go into general, um, you may choose to add some additional things within your survey. If you're allowing individuals to go and navigate between different questions, like allowing them to go back, you can choose to have buttons. If I just click that down arrow, it automatically populates. I like to include a progress bar. You can either include it with text or without text. You can see at the top here, 0 to 100 is what the preview looks like. That will just give your participants a sense of how much more time they might need to spend on the survey, how many more questions they have left. And you can toggle between desktop and mobile view for those. And it will also show you things as you update them, so you have this little arrow. Okay. So this is the one that I would generally make updates on. And I don't typically worry about any of these other ones. I'll click apply just to apply those arrows and that progress bar. In survey options, I typically look at a few more things. So the first thing is the display name. So I definitely want to update that one. Research project survey, because this will show up on browser tabs. So when participants are filling out your survey, you know how at the top here I have edit survey, Qualtrics Experience Management? It will say what you put in to the display name. So just so they're on the same page as to what they're doing. I typically do add a survey description, which is like, this survey is part of the project and the name of the project, and like, what is the purpose of this survey. I don't typically turn on the question numbers because I like to customize my question numbers for my own purposes. So when I export, I can easily make sense of the questions, and I don't find that that is very helpful for participants. The next thing that we want to look at is this response tab. There's a back button option, which isn't a default. You can add a back button that will allow your participants to go back to previous pages and to change their responses. This is valuable for if you've added page breaks into your survey. So I can go back to the survey builder, and you notice that we have blocks, which are how I structure what are the type of questions that are in there. And then you have questions, but you can also add a page break between anything. And that just means that the next question will appear on the next page. You may choose to do this because you have a lot of questions and it is very long, and you might want to group questions within like a subsection within a block, but you might choose not to do that. However, if you choose to add page breaks, what happens is that participants will go on to the next question within a block and may find that they actually want to change a response to a previous question. So here, adding the back button will allow them to do that. It won't appear when you have survey flow elements between survey blocks, so they shouldn't be able to navigate back to the consent document. And you can test that within the preview. So you might want to choose to put that on. Allowing respondents to finish later is an it's automatically defaulted to being turned on. That depends on you. Maybe you don't want participants to be able to finish later because you think they will forget. You can always turn it off. Otherwise, you will have to set how long they have to finish the survey before it is marked as incomplete, and that will determine on how long they have to finish things later. Okay, so what is an incomplete survey response. The default is to record survey responses after a week if they are not completed or if the participant never comes back to finish it. You can choose to delete records if you don't want to know, but perhaps you are interested in where participants decided to leave the survey. I typically keep a week. You may choose to select anything you want. It goes from 1 hour to 1 year. Which determines when start the timer. I just keep this as a default. Qualtrics will give you some additional information about how long it took participants to complete the study. When did they originally start? When did they resume? If that matters to you, you can change these options. Survey availability. The default is to leave the survey open to collect responses. However, I like to set a specific start and expiration date. Especially if you have human subjects research studies, they will only be valid within a specific window that you have gotten approval for. I just like to set it so that it is no longer active after the date that it is expired. It just makes it so that I don't have to go back in and shut things down. I don't have to remember. So you can choose your availability. You can choose what the start date is and the time and the expiration date and the time. And you can always change this later. You'll want to click Save Changes. Just so you know, if you're making these changes after you have published your survey, you will need to publish your survey again to see these changes. This is just like editing your question, only it won't prompt you. So just keep that in mind. Okay. And you can choose to have a specific custom message if your survey is inactive. I typically don't bother, but you can if you would like by going to the library, creating a custom message and going and putting it in here. Next is security. Available to anyone is the default option and the one that I keep usually because these surveys are anonymous. And so they shouldn't be by invitation only because they will connect the person's name with their response. So you don't want that. You can have it password protected. I typically don't bother. I typically don't add a referral web URL. You can choose to prevent multiple submissions. So maybe you don't want your participants to respond more than once to a survey. I think this looks at their IP address to make that determination. So that's up to you. Bot detection, you typically won't have to worry about unless you're putting it on a public website that, maybe the bot is indexing, which is an option here about indexing. But you can choose to put that on. That will just put up the reCAPTCHA, which is match the photos that have, select all the photos that have bumblebees, or put in this string of letters and numbers to make sure that you're human. Indexing is turned on automatically, so if you post your link to a website, bots can't put it as a search engine result so that you can control who is responding to your survey. And then the most important one, because this is an anonymous survey, is we want to turn on anonymized responses. It's all the way at the bottom and the default is off. Make sure you turn this on. This will mean it will not collect IP addresses, location data, or contact information, which is personal information. Okay, so these are the ones that I typically look at. There are some more information about post-survey. I typically don't bother. So those are, I think, the most important survey options that I would go through. And so now let's navigate back to the builder and let's do a preview of our survey. So we can do that by going to the right-hand menu and clicking preview. It will always open a new window. So you don't have to worry about exiting. Like, you can just click out of it, click the X once you're done looking at this window. You can see a preview in mobile on the right and then a desktop preview in the center. There are tools here. You can choose to ignore validation. So all those questions that we forced responses of, so saying you can't proceed unless you select this question might get a little bit tedious after a while if you're testing, especially if you're testing multiple times. So you may choose to ignore that validation. But for the first time around, I would suggest keeping it on just to see how things are behaving. Okay, so here we just do testing, right? We scroll all the way down. We say, what happens if they say, I do not agree to participate? We expect that there is a message that comes up. Thank you for your interest. Okay, great. Now we can go and reset the survey and we can see what happens if I agree to participate. That should bring us into our exclusion criteria. Are you a student? What happens if you click no? That should kick us out. Thank you for your interest. Okay, great. So now we have to agree to participate again, and we have to say that we are a student. And now we get to test things. So we know that if we say, do you currently live in Michigan? If we say yes, that will not give us that follow-up question. We can see what happens. Okay, so it's saying that it did not give us that follow-up question, but it does have the question about where do we live, because we were exploring that as another option, and we can say other, and we can type in, I live in California, right? Or I live in Indiana, right? We have the back button, so we can go back and we can say what happens if I select no. Where do you currently live? So that's working as intended. Okay. And let's say we go back. You'll notice we can't go back into the next block. So let's restart this survey again, and let's do a final check as to make sure that responses are actually being forced for the questions. So if I don't select either of these options and I go forward, what happens? It should please answer this question. So it will not let participants proceed until they answer that question. So I agree again. Am I a student? Yes. What happens if I don't answer these questions, which only request the response? There is one unanswered question on this page. Would you like to continue? You can answer it or continue without answering. So I can continue without answering. And if I do the same thing for this one, there are 3 unanswered questions. I can click answer the questions. Any questions about previewing? The validation means that you won't get, ignoring the validation means you won't get that pop-up. However, because survey flow is enabled on this survey, it will still require you to answer those questions about if you consent and if you're a student. You can't go around it because that's just the way that it's set up. You can't avoid that sort of validation. Okay. So we've done that. We're feeling good about this. So what are the next things that I'd like to talk about? So one thing that I'd like to talk about before I publish is how to rename your survey. You can, like I said, you can do that within this box. If I change it to Sample Research Project Survey, you will notice that we'll update at the top here. It might take a second. I actually might have to reload for it to appear, but as you see, it has appeared right here. There is also another way to do this. If you go into projects, you can go to these 3 dots at the right of your project and click rename project, and so I can rename it back. This is also, oops, I clicked into it, and so it's a little finicky about where you're clicking. So going back to projects, if I click on these 3 dots, I can choose collaborate, and I can add who I want to have access to this study. So like say that I want my coworker, Jason Glatz, to have access to this study, and I want to add selected. He will receive an invite to participate, and then I can say, what permissions do I want to give him? So this is really great for if you have an advisor or maybe a colleague who's also helping you out with this study, and you can make any of these options available or not available to them by clicking, you know, these check marks. I think if they're your advisor and they're responsible for your research, after you're gone, after you've left the institution, you might want to keep all of these checked because it will give them access to your results. And you can click save. Okay, let's see. So we've previewed our survey. So now we can go back in here and we can decide to publish our research survey. So once we click publish, it will tell us about like recommendations that we can include. So if we click on that, it will tell us like why, what are the suggestions and why you can make those changes, or you can just choose to publish your survey. And once you've published it, it will give you a link to the survey. So you can copy this link and put it somewhere safe. If you forget what this link is or where you've lost track of it, you can actually get it again by going into the distributions menu up here and going into anonymous link. And then you can just go ahead and copy survey link from here. Next, we want to go into data and analysis. This is where you would typically export your results. However, when you are previewing your survey and logging answers, they will actually record those responses. And so you will want to make sure that you delete these responses before you share this survey with anyone, just so you don't get confused that this is not a participant, this was just you testing. The way that you do this is you want to click on this check mark next to recorded data. We have these two responses selected, and now we can click that trash can to delete. I want to not have those two responses appear, and I'm sure that I want to delete them, and now they are gone. It might take a little bit of time, but they are no longer present within your data set, which is what we want before we disseminate those. And you will notice that the request is pending. It might take a little bit of time. Just like whenever you navigate into this window, if you have responses recorded from participants, it might take a little bit of time for it to populate. Which is typically why I don't use the Qualtrics interface to look at the results. I like to export my results. The way you do that is you click the export and import menu under the same data and analysis menu, and I click export data. I usually pick CSV, you can pick Excel or SPSS, whatever you would like, and you just click download, and it will take a little bit of time. Once it is at 100%, then it will go into, you can click download, it will be a zip file, and then you can find it and open it up and make any sort of, you can look at it and do your analysis that way. Any questions for me at this point? Okay, so I'm going to switch over really quickly to the slides again, just to wrap up. So you've done all the things, right? You've created your survey. What does the IRB want from you? So do not send a survey link from Qualtrics to the IRB to review. So we had that distribution link. It might be tempting just to give it to the IRB. The IRB is not going to want that. What they really want is ideally a Word document with your questions, the options, and whether something is required or not. You can also choose to export a PDF, save a PDF out from Qualtrics from that menu. However, I find that it sometimes cuts off the responses and the survey flow, and it won't have things like the decline messages. So I like to generate a Word document. And you can even do this before you set up your Qualtrics survey and send it to the IRB for approval, and then set up your Qualtrics survey, since you will have to update like that consent form information about when the study was approved, and you might update when the survey is available, between what dates. Okay, we talked about distribution. So additional human subjects considerations. So just some reminders. This is something that Julia Mays, who's our research compliance officer, wanted me to remind you of. So All human subjects' research data must be kept in a secure location at Western. That secure location means that it's only accessible by research team members. So anyone who is in your proposal listed as someone who is involved with the research study, only those individuals have access to this data. If you are working with physical data, like your consent forms are on paper, it should be in a locked cabinet in a locked office that only research team members have access to. If you are storing your digital data on external hard drives, which you might be, right now you might be storing in Qualtrics, which is great. It's research compliant, but afterwards, after your study is done, you might want to put it somewhere else. Those hard drives should be encrypted and password protected. After your study closes, which is defined by the study becomes closed within Cayuse, you need to keep your research data for at least 3 years. If you are a student and you are leaving the university, your advisor or your PI or co-PI is responsible for keeping your research data for 3 years. If you are a student and you want to take your data with you, you can only take your de-identified data set. Any sort of information about the participant, their location, anything that could identify them needs to be removed. If you have any questions about these things, feel free to contact OVPR, so the Office of Vice President for Research, about them. Julia is usually the one looking at those emails. You are also welcome to send a draft of your proposal or your consent form and ask her further questions. She is very nice and will give you instructions and guidance if you need it. Any questions for me about any of that? Okay. Other than that, that is all the content that I wanted to get through today. So thank you so much for sticking around. I have one upcoming workshop on April 3rd, which is an introduction to data analysis using Excel, which focuses on reusing data sets and combining data sets together within Excel and some different formulas and functions you can do with that. If you would like to get access to the slides to review, you can do that by accessing this Google Drive that I just pasted in. There's also a workshop feedback document within there that has a link to Qualtrics if you'd like to give me feedback or if you have suggestions for anything that you would like to see me do in terms of workshops in the future. If you have a project and you would like more support about that project that involves research data, feel free to email me or set up a consultation or give me a call. I am happy to give you guidance and talk about your project in particular. And other than that, you will receive a recording of this workshop tomorrow, along with those slides again and the Qualtrics form. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope to see you in the future.